Hi, I'm Kerry Lord from TOFT. This video forms part of a series to accompany the Edwards Crochet kits, patterns and books.
In this video, I'm going to sew up an Edwards Menagerie bird. So you can see the whole process, start to finish, of putting a bird together, because it's a little bit different from an animal. So with these ones, the head and the body is one piece. You crochet the body first and you finish on the head. So when you finish the head, just gather those last few stitches together. It's only 6 on the top of a bird's head, and then sew that down through. There we go, so you've sewn that bit into position, and just secure it by sewing around a stitch. There we go, so that's your head and body there in one piece. And the thing that I will always add first on a bird, very, very different to what I do with the animals, is I will actually add the beak first. So if you take its little body and head, the bird standard form has a chest. So if you turn it round to the side, do you see how here you've got a chest on the front of this? That is the front of your bird, is the bit that has the chest. The neck sits on the back and the chest is on the front. So you need to get that little chest upwards before you put your beak into position. With your beak, sew the end closed. So this is a canary in lime here. So it's a nice little short beak. So I'm just gonna sew that closed. As so. There we go, and through the beak. So that's closed off. And then I'm going to put a tiny little bit of stuffing inside that beak, so a really little bit, just to make sure that it stays 3D when it's on the front of the face. So I've put that into position. And this is the important bit that I want to show you with sewing on a beak, because basically you're sewing on a thing in a contrast colour, and this can be quite tricky to get neat, which is why I wanted to show you, because you sometimes do it on animals as well as birds, and it's probably the trickiest bit, is the fact that you need to sew something really neat in a contrast colour on. So I'll run up the middle of that body where the front of that chest is and pop my beak into position, and then I'm going to do a back stitch in order to keep this as neat as I possibly can. So go down into the body and then up through the beak across here. There you go, and then back down into the next stitch along and up here. There we go, and then back down into the body over here and across here. And what that does is, rather than over sewing the part, which I will often do if I'm doing it in the same colour, because I find it a little bit easier and faster, this will give you a lovely neat finish. And you could choose to do this on all of your parts if you so wish. So into here, back down into here, across again. There we go. Down there and across. So I've gone all the way around, securing that beak into position. And then all you need to remember when you are fixing your yarn, when you're using a contrast yarn, is you do need to fix it into the colour that you're obviously using. So don't try and fix that off into the line. You need to go back up into the beak here and go around a couple of stitches just to secure that end. There we go. Right, so that's your beak in position. So next I'm going to put the wings on, and the wings, there are different wing shapes, and these are flying wings here, but there are a few other wing shapes. Most of them have a front and a back. So the front will be the straighter line, the curved line, and the back will be the bit that is a bit more bulbous. It has a bit more shaping in. So I'm just going to close the top closed again, and then move to positioning this wing. So put your wing into position like so. So as I said, this is the curved line that's going to go on the front, and the more bulbous shape piece which will be going on the back of the bird. Now I tend to find that your end, so where you finished on 6 stitches, will be there, and it'll go just to the front of the neck when you're positioning them. So bring this into position here, sew between the body and the wing, And I will do a few stitches down the beginning, down the front of the wing, 2, just pull that yarn through, 3, and a 4th one. And then I'm just going to sew underneath, so take the same piece of thread, go underneath, making sure you're in the body rather than popping out the surface, back up to where you were, there, and then I'll sew down the back of this shoulder. So between the top of the wing and the body, just to really fix those into position. Now it really changes your bird's personality on how you position these wings. If you do them quite far forward and flop down, they're going to look a bit sad. If you do them flying back and high, they're going to look energetic or like they're just about to take flight. So you can add a lot more personality than you might think with the positioning of these wings. I'm just going to pop that in there. And then go through that last one. So I'm going to go up into my wing and then secure it around 2 stitches in the same way that I've been doing throughout. 1 and then 2. Then onto my wing on the other side. The most important bit being now that we get it in the same place, but use your stitches and rows as a guide. They form a grid, which is really, really handy, that you can use in order to line everything up. So I'm just going to close these 6 stitches off again. Go and start from the front as I did before. So turn it with the beak facing forward, so you can really see the front, and position this wing to match the other one on the other side. So you see I've got my beak centralised in the front, I'm holding it in my hand and I'm lining that wing up so that this line here matches this one here, making sure my back lines up too, and then do exactly what I did before, is sew down around 4 stitches on the front first, 2, 3, and use your rows as a guide. So do you see how I can look on this side and see that I did attach into that row there? So I'll just do that on that side, put my 4 in, then go right beneath the fabric through the body and pop up again at the top of the wing, and do the same thing down this side. So 1, 2, 'There we go, and then secure that off. Okay, then we are on to our legs. And the legs are pretty funny with the bird. I think it's their characteristic really. With the animals it might be the tummy, with the birds it's definitely their spindly legs. So what I've got here are the standard perching legs. What you need to do is, with these ends, is just to run round and pick up those last few stitches, it's hardly any, and then sew those back in like that. On your gaps in between, which you'll get with bird legs when you're doing that splitting technique, I, just to neaten them up, will take that bit that's been created when you've rejoined to work another toe, and just do a couple of stitches through the middle of your gap and then back down into there. Same again on the ends. The birds have a few more ends than the animals, but that's by their very nature. You're working small rounds and they're a little bit more fiddly. I personally love making birds. Yes, they are a bit more fiddly when it comes to sewing them up, but they have so much character in them, and a lot more opportunity for being quite creative really with the character that you put in when you sew them up. So sew in a few more ends like that. There we go. And it is important to sew these ends in. If you were to snip them off because you're feeling impatient, believe me, they will unwind. And that's the last thing that would be really upsetting, is if you've spent the time doing all the crochet and then you snip the ends off and they unwind. So do spend the extra 5 minutes sewing in all the ends to make sure that they're never going to unravel. So that's those in. What I'm going to do is stuff a tiny bit of stuffing in the top of the thigh. just to give that a bit more 3D shape. I don't stuff the knees. I guess you could choose to if you wanted to pull some stuffing down into that knee, but I don't do that. I'm just stuffing the thighs at the top. And then I'm sewing them closed. So in the same way that you sew the animal legs closed, for those that have done animals as well, it's quite important that you sew these closed first. It will make it a lot easier to attach them. So line up your leg to make sure it's going to be flat when you sew it. If you have got a colour change like this one, to get the nicest effect, I would always put the colour change to the back. So line it up flat and get your colour change to the back. Then fold your thigh in half. There we go, and sew the top closed. Right, then in the same way as I do with the animals, we're going to look for a thirds position. So if you run an invisible line down the middle of this bird, so down through its beak, down through its body, and down to its wings, I'm going to position that leg there on the bottom third line, really just after the 6-stitch start. So they're quite close together, the bird legs. You've got your 6-stitch start that you can see on the bottom of the body, and then put your leg into position just after that. I'm going to over sew down one side of the leg first. And then flip it over and do the other side, so they're really secure, because believe me, if you are making these for little people, the birds will get carried around by their legs, if they haven't got necks, certainly. The ones with longer necks might get carried around by their necks, but these ones with dangly legs are definitely going to be carried upside down. So just secure that off. Because I've said that, I'm going to just make sure it's extra secure in the leg, because I know that they can take a bit of abuse. So that's it, secure that in. So I then put my next leg in, and I'm going to be a bit of a cheater, and I'm not going to sew all those ends in on this video, otherwise you'll be here watching what I've just done before. But obviously in exactly the same way, sew those ends in. I'm just going to sew up the thigh so you can see that bit again and see the positioning of the second leg, and then I'll move on to that all-important tail. So pop that in. So lie that flat again, get your colour changing to the back, and sew the top closed, keeping all that stuffing on the inside. There we go, and that's going to go to the front to keep my colour changing on the back. So now line that up, make sure you're in line with your wings, position it in, and then just over sew. Flip it over and do the other side. There we go. So that's your legs in position, your wings in position, canary's starting to look great. Last thing is your tail. So in the same way as before, sew in these ends, sew in the gap like we did with the legs. The tails I don't generally stuff unless it says otherwise, so I think there's a few exceptions, like Petra the booby bird, for example, has a stuffed tail, just so that you can stand it upright. Generally, if you put a little bit of stuffing in, you'll be able to stand it upright. That said, a lot of people with these birds are really enjoying using pipe cleaners or wire in order to give them a bit more structure and a bit more life. So you could always put some wire into the legs. I've seen plenty of people wire them so they'll stand up, or you could also wire the tails up if you wanted to. So having done your tail, flip your animal over, your bird over, and run this tail down the middle of that wing point, so you're running it to that point there, so you definitely know you're going to be in line. And then exactly the same way that I have done before, just over sew it across that row. So worth mentioning is if it's a bird where its tail is a different colour to its body, the patterns will always set you off with your chain start in the colour of the body, and that's going to make it super easy for you to sew it on. That's because You saw how slow it was to do that beak. It's quite hard to get a neat line when you're using a contrast colour and sewing it on. So instead with the tails, what I've done in the majority of patterns would be to set you off so you've got a chain start that matches your body, and that means it'll make it a lot easier for you to get a lovely neat finish when you're putting that tail into position. So then that's it, flip it and just run across doing the same thing on the other side. There we go. All done. And that's a bird completely sewn up.